Hey guys, I'm continuing and concluding my reviews on the Friday the 13th series with the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot. Now, this was directed by Marcus Nispel, who prior to this directed the 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the film was written by Mark Swift and Damian Shannon, who prior to this actually wrote Freddy vs. Jason. What do you think of the Friday the 13th reboot?
I think it's pretty good. I think it takes things back to basics, with Jason being at Camp Crystal Lake instead of, Manhattan or space. And, I like that they make him more human than he was in the previous few movies, the indestructible zombie.
Mm-hmm.
So he's able to be hurt.
Yeah, this movie is definitely a return to form for the series, especially because if you look at the first 4 Friday the 13th movies, the stories for those movies are very, very simplistic, and this kind of returns the series to that, very simplistic formula as opposed to the overly convoluted and complex stories of, Jason Goes to Hell or Freddy vs. Jason.
Yes.
That being said, I would personally rather watch Freddy vs. Jason or Jason Goes to Hell than this. I didn't hate this movie. Keep in mind, when I watched this with you just now, that was my first time seeing it since it came out in 2009. And I remember when I saw it as a teenager, I hated it at the time because I was in that mindset where I was just anti-remake, anti-reboot. But watching it now, again, I don't hate it, but this is definitely my least favorite Friday the 13th movie, and I think the biggest thing this movie has against it is the characters. The characters in this movie, with the exception of Clay, the other characters in this movie fucking suck. You have Trent, who is a fucking douchebag for no reason whatsoever. And the other characters are just walking stereotypes. Clay's sister is alright, I guess, and the one girl who starts to develop a thing for Clay, those two are alright, but the other characters are, I used to think the characters in Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason were annoying. They're fucking Harlan Ellison characters compared to the characters from this fucking movie.
Well, I've always thought Chewie was kind of entertaining.
Who the fuck was Chewie again?
The Asian one.
Oh, okay. Alright, yeah. I don't know. Do you want to explain the plot of this one?
The plot of this movie is that Clay's sister goes missing and he tries to find her, and of course, it turns out Jason is behind that disappearance and goes on another murderous rampage.
Yeah, that's the basic plot of the movie, and again, I totally get why people would like this one. It does have the feel of the first 4 Friday the 13th movies, but to me the characters in the original series, in the first 4 movies, while they certainly were cliched in the first 4 films, they still felt more likable than the characters in this movie.
The only really unlikable character is Trent.
Yeah, but even the other characters, to me, just felt like I said, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but they basically felt like walking stereotypes to me. Again, I really did like Clay, though. I thought Clay was a great character. Played really well by Jared. How do you say his last name?
I think it's Padalecki.
Yeah, who people might recognize as Sam from Supernatural.
He was also in the House of Wax remake.
Oh, was he? It's been a while since I've seen that one. What do you think of Derek Mears as Jason?
Oh, he does a great job. He's very fierce. Very swift. He just goes for it in terms of being this brutal, aggressive killing machine.
Yeah, no, he's pretty good as Jason, and the thing about, so this movie, it drops all the supernatural aspects of the Jason character, where it's pretty obvious in this movie that Jason never actually drowned. His mother only thought he was dead, and he was just living out in the woods the whole time, which was certainly implied in the earlier Friday the 13th sequels, but I feel like the earlier Friday the 13th sequels still left it somewhat ambiguous where, okay, maybe he was just living out in the woods the whole time, or maybe he really did die and just came back. Like, I feel like there was room for both interpretations with the earlier films. Here, they make it pretty obvious and straightforward. Jason is 100% human, 100% non-supernatural in this one. But I always had an issue with that, though, because to me the idea that this kid was just out in the woods after supposedly drowned in, and he didn't even let his mother fucking know that he was alive. I always found that to be a gigantic fucking plot hole, which is why I kind of prefer the supernatural Jason.
Yeah, I have to agree. That is a big plot hole, and also, if he was living in the woods on the campgrounds, wouldn't any of the people there have noticed him before he started killing people?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a pretty big plot hole. You know, again, Derek Mears does a great job as Jason. I've met him several times. He's very nice. He's definitely built to play Jason, I must say. He's very tall. Muscular.
Now, the opening scene of this movie is basically a remake of the ending of the original Friday the 13th, where you see Pamela Voorhees going after Alice, and then Alice decapitates her. But I want to point out that Pamela Voorhees in the opening scene is actually played by Nana Visitor, who people might recognize as Kira from Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, now, when we were watching it, because this says the killer cut, so I'm guessing this is a different version than the theatrical cut. And when we were watching it, you were pointing out some scenes that you didn't recognize. And
yeah, there's a few differences between this cut and the theatrical cut. The main one I noticed was Whitney actually escaping from her shackles, but of course Jason recaptures her anyway, whereas in the theatrical cut, Jason stopped her from even escaping the first time.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't remember the theatrical cut because I haven't seen it since it came out in theaters. But again, I mean, I don't hate this one, but I would still rather watch... I would rather watch Jason Goes to Hell or Jason X. And Jason X I used to hate. I've warmed up to that one a little bit in recent years, but I would rather watch both of those or Freddy vs. Jason over this one. I mean, I'm not going to say I won't watch this one again. I think I definitely liked it better than the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but to me it's just very mediocre, you know. But I do get why fans of the older Friday the 13th movies would like this one.
Yeah, I kind of like how they present Jason as kind of a hunter in this movie. You know, he's got the, not just his machete, he's got the bow and arrow, he sets up traps.
Yeah, no, I mean, there was implications of that in the earlier Friday the 13th sequels, especially Part 2. And this one definitely seems to take some elements from Friday the 13th Part 2. The fact that in this movie, you see Jason wearing a burlap sack before he discovers the hockey mask. Then also Clay's sister, like, he seems to see his mother in Clay's sister, and she does try to do that whole thing that Ginny did at the end of Friday the 13th Part 2 of pretending to be Jason's mother. And then also Jason keeping his mother's head as sort of a shrine. Clay does seem to be loosely based on Sandra's brother from Friday the 13th Part 4.
Oh, the one played by Eric Anderson.
Yeah.
I forget the character's name, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Rob, right? I think it was Rob.
Yeah. What do you think of the kills in this movie?
Actually, the kills were pretty damn good. Especially that one kill in the beginning where Jason had the poor girl in the fucking sleeping bag over the goddamn fire. I was like, holy fucking shit.
That one was brutal.
Yeah.
Chewie gets the whatever that is in his throat. That's also pretty brutal.
One thing I'd like to mention about the remake is that the people in the town seemed to know what Jason was doing. Like, that old woman who Clay, first goes to ask about his sister, said that everyone just wanted to be left alone, and so does he. You know, this shows that I think Jason has a bit of a reputation there among the locals.
Any closing thoughts on the Friday the 13th reboot?
I'd say definitely give it a watch.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the older movies, you might like this one. or you might hate it too. I mean, it could go either way. But my opinions of this movie are very, very mixed. For me, the characters just really kind of brought this movie down. I did not really care for any of these characters, with the exception of Clay.
Now, there was never a sequel to this, even though there were talks of doing one. And for the longest time, there were even talks of doing a found-footage Friday the 13th movie, but that never came to fruition, and the big reason we haven't gotten another Friday the 13th movie in the 14 years since this came out was because for the longest time there was a legal battle between Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller, the original creators of this franchise, over who actually owned the rights. I think the courts have ruled in Victor Miller's favor, and currently A24 is developing a Friday the 13th prequel series called Crystal Lake. Now, whether this is going to be in continuity with this reboot or the original series, or just in its own continuity, remains to be seen.
Hey guys, before we end this video, we just want to play an audio clip of our late friend Chris Mano giving his thoughts on the Friday the 13th remake.
Yeah, he helped us review the movies back in 2018. I always enjoyed hearing his opinions on everything, so take a listen.
Personally, I think the reboot nails it. I feel like it was kind of polarized between a lot of people. They didn't really like, there was either people who just didn't think much of it or people who enjoyed it but also didn't think it was a classic. Personally, I think kind of the best of the franchise is like the first 4, 6, and this one, because this one kind of goes back to the roots, takes a lot of the supernatural out of Jason and just turns him into sort of like a dude living on the land, kind of protecting his territory, like being a hunter. It's a really interesting direction to take Jason in, especially since it's so simple compared to what came before. And I like it a lot for that reason. I really love the characters. This was a really good cast of characters in this one. Getting Jared from Supernatural, and it was a really good choice. I'm trying to think of anything else that really stands out to me. The opening is great. That whole, I think it goes on for almost 20 minutes, of them coming to the campsite and everything. That's a fun one. And admittedly, the ending could be better. It's kind of like an ending that happens just because that's what they're expecting people to, want. But it's also at the same time, if you go back to the original, that whole jump scare with Alice in the canoe, it's kind of a callback to that. So I guess it's appropriate, even though it kind of doesn't leave you with much. But yeah, I love the reboot, honestly. I like it a lot.
Here are my friend John's thoughts on the Friday the 13th reboot.
After Jason takes Manhattan, goes to hell, goes to space, and fighting Freddy Krueger, at this point in time, the next step in the franchise was remaking it. That's what happens after making too many crappy sequels. I was 15 around the time when this remake came out. I did not see it in the movie theaters at the time it came out. After seeing all the Friday the 13th movies around that time, I checked out the remake 1 year later in 2010. Was not a fan, very disappointed in it. I moved on after that, did not rewatch this movie again until 2020, when we were on lockdown during COVID. Because around that time in 2020, it was the 40th anniversary of the first Friday the 13th movie. I marathoned all the Friday the 13th movies while we were all on lockdown, and of course, recently rewatched this for this video. Well, in rewatching, it occurred to me how they were doing the same thing as all other, horror remakes of the 2000s. It was trying too hard to appeal and please the modern teen audiences at that time. Jared Padalecki, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, who was on the horror TV show Supernatural. I've never seen an episode of that series, but I remember how big and popular that show was around that time in the 2000s. I was a little familiar with Jared Padalecki as an actor before his big breakout on Supernatural, from seeing him make small appearances in movies and TV shows. He was also in the 2005 god-awful House of Wax remake. It's also ironic around this time when the Friday the 13th remake came out, his co-star Jensen Ackles from Supernatural was in the My Bloody Valentine remake, but if I had to pick one, the My Bloody Valentine remake was better. His character's alright, he's nothing special. He's basically looking for his younger sister who went missing because Jason Voorhees kidnapped her. You sympathize with him making sure he finds his younger sister. His character's very simple and straightforward. He has decent okay chemistry with Danielle Panabaker. Around this time I remember her from the Disney 2005 Sky High movie. She's had a successful career as an actress beyond the TV show Flash. The character Trent was such an asshole. He was a bully to Clay. I remember this actor was in the first Transformers when we played another forgetful bully. It's one of the few rare times in this series I've ever seen Jason Voorhees hold a hostage. Derek Mears as Jason Voorhees does an okay job. He's no Kane Hodder. He's very ruthless, brutal, strong, and fast. As a teen watching this movie, I really hated it. Rewatching it for the third time, I don't hate this movie. It's just not a go-to Friday the 13th movie for me. I find it very bland, forgetful, boring, and not interesting. It's a movie I don't have a lot to say about. I can take it or leave it with this movie. It's basically the same simple cliche, stupid, dumb characters doing the same old stuff they should not be doing in order to survive Jason Voorhees. We've gone almost 15 years without another Jason Voorhees movie. Lord knows if they'll ever make another Friday the 13th movie. They originally intended to make a sequel and start a new series, but because of this movie's failure, the sequel was cancelled. I read that the original sequel idea to this movie was have the movie take place in the winter time. Thank you, Christian, for having me a part of this. See y'all next time.
And here is Joey's thoughts on the 2009 Friday the 13th remake.
Friday the 13th, the remake, in my opinion, is okay, but, I like the classics a lot. I'm not really a person for remakes. It's okay, but really I don't have much to say, about this movie, because I'm not a remake person. In my opinion, I know everybody's different. I know there's a lot of people that like remakes. I hear they're coming out with like a Crystal Lake series or something like that. I think it's next year, So, of course, I'll check that out. Again, that's something new, but I'll still check that out.
But yeah, that concludes my series of reviews on the Friday the 13th movies, and this also concludes this year's horror month, which I know was a relatively short horror month. I only reviewed 2 franchises this year, Friday the 13th, and then the When a Stranger Calls movies. Next year, I'm going to try to do a little bit more franchises than that. Like, I'm hoping to review the Mummy movies next year, the old Universal Mummy movies. I'm planning on reviewing Lucio Fulci's Gates of Hell trilogy and possibly the Scream movies, but I don't know for sure. No guarantees on that, and I may or may not redo my reviews of the Halloween movies next year. But again, no guarantees. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed our review, and see you later.